I had been preparing for that conversation for 3 weeks. Not rehearsing, exactly, more the specific mental preparation that happens when you have something important to ask someone and you want to be ready to make the case clearly. I had printed my financial projections. I had organized my business plan into a folder with dividers. I had written down in the order I intended to say them the key points about where the business was and where I needed it to go. Callaway Community Bank had been in our neighborhood for 30 years. I had banked there since I was 22. I was now 36, and the account I had maintained there through the lean years and the saving years and the everything I have going into this years was the account I was standing at the counter to discuss. The woman behind the counter was not the loan officer. I had not yet been called back for that appointment. I was at the main counter, handling a routine transaction first, a small transfer, before the meeting that was scheduled for 11 o'clock. She pulled up my account. She looked at the screen. And then she laughed. Not a small laugh, the kind that escapes before someone catches it. A real laugh, brief and deliberate, the kind that is intended to communicate something to whoever is standing in earshot. She looked at me over the counter. "Ma'am," she said, in a voice that the entire line behind me could hear clearly, "this balance is embarrassing." She tilted her head toward the side. "Please step aside. I need to help other customers." The line was 7 people deep. All 7 of them heard every word. The whispering started while I was still standing at the counter, while I was still processing what had just been said to me and trying to decide what response was available to me and whether any of the responses I was forming were the ones I actually wanted to use. I stepped to the side. I stood against the counter with my folder of financial projections in my hands and the sound of 7 people becoming 8, and then 9, and the specific awareness of being looked at in the way people look at someone who has just been publicly diminished. And then a man quietly pulled out the chair from the small waiting area near the counter and sat down beside me. I had not noticed him before. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, in a jacket and no tie, with a particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who are accustomed to being in rooms and have long since stopped needing to signal their presence. He looked at me. He said, very quietly, "I heard what she said to you." Before I could respond, the teller looked up from her counter, perhaps because the lobby had shifted, perhaps because someone near her said something, and she saw him. Her face went completely white. The word she said was barely audible. "Sir." A pause. "I didn't know." He turned to look at her. "I know you didn't," he said. His voice had not risen. His expression had not changed. There was nothing theatrical about what he said, or how he said it. But the teller stopped speaking, and the lobby went quiet, and several people near the counter were suddenly very still. What happened next shocked everyone in that bank. Before I tell you what he did, please take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what country you are watching from. Now, let's begin. My name is Sandra Mitchell. I am 36 years old. And I want to tell you what was in the account that the teller found embarrassing. 3 years of savings. Every month for 36 months, I had put aside a portion of my paycheck from the marketing coordinator job I had held for 8 years, quietly, consistently, into an account I did not touch. Not for a vacation or a car, or anything that felt good in the short term. For a specific and distant purpose that I had been working toward since I was 29 years old and first understood, clearly and without ambiguity, what I wanted to build. A boutique. A small women's clothing and accessories store in the neighborhood where I had grown up, in a storefront that had been empty for 2 years, in a building whose owner I had been speaking to for 18 months before we finally arrived at terms I could manage. 6 months before the morning at the bank, I had signed the lease. I had invested the savings. I had stocked the store. I had opened the doors on a Saturday in April with a sign in the window and 12 people I knew standing inside, and a hope I had been carrying for 3 years finally taking up physical space in the world. 6 months in, the store was doing what small businesses do in their first year, generating enough to be real, not yet enough to be easy. I was paying myself last, which is the phrase that sounds straightforward until you're living it, which means paying every supplier and every vendor and the landlord before you pay yourself, which means that the personal account at Callaway Community Bank, the one I had maintained for 14 years, was carrying a balance that represented my current personal reserves after 6 months of building. It was not zero. It was not nothing. It was the balance of someone in the process of building something, which looks, to a person who does not know the context, like a small number. And to a teller who decided that a small number was an invitation to perform, it looked like material. I had come to the bank that morning for two purposes: the routine transaction at the counter and an 11 o'clock meeting with the business lending department about a small business loan. A bridge loan, not a large amount, to cover operating costs through what I expected to be the store's inflection point, the 6 to 12-month window that most small retail businesses either survive or don't. I had the projections. I had the plan. I had 14 years of account history at this bank and a business with 6 months of real revenue. I was standing against the counter with my folder when the man sat down beside me. His name was James Calloway. I did not know this when he sat down. I knew it within about 90 seconds because the teller's reaction told me that whoever had just taken the chair beside me was not a customer waiting for his number to be called, and because the lobby manager, a woman who had been moving efficiently between stations, stopped moving and stood very still when she registered who was seated in the waiting area. James Calloway had founded Calloway Community Bank 30 years earlier. He was 62 years old. He still came to the Millbrook branch, the original branch, the one his father had helped him open, every Wednesday morning. He had been in the lobby when he heard the teller. He told me this himself, in the conversation that followed, without any drama attached to it. He had been crossing from the door to the side office when he heard the words, "This balance is embarrassing, please step aside," and he had stopped walking and stood still for a moment and then changed direction. He said that in 30 years of running a community bank, he had heard a lot of things he wished he hadn't heard. But those specific words, the word embarrassing aimed at a customer's account, said loudly enough for a line of people to absorb. Those were words he had not built his bank to produce. He sat down beside me and he asked me, quietly, why I had come in that morning. I told him about the store, about the 6 months, about the 11 o'clock meeting. He listened the way people listen when they're not waiting for you to finish, when they're actually following what you are saying. Then he stood up. "Come with me," he said. He walked me across the lobby, past the teller line, past the counter where my account had been called embarrassing 4 minutes earlier, past the 7 people who had been in line and the additional people who had arrived since then and were now watching a man in a jacket and no-tie escort a woman with a folder of financial projections through the lobby of Calloway Community Bank toward the door marked private. Bank officers. The teller was watching. The lobby manager was watching. Everyone was watching. James Calloway held the door open. I walked through it. His office was at the end of a short hallway, a room that was functional rather than grand, the office of a person who used the space to work rather than to impress. He called his business lending director on an internal line and asked her to join us. Her name was Patricia Okafor. She arrived within 3 minutes, with a legal pad and the brisk competence of someone accustomed to pivoting quickly. James Calloway introduced me and said that I had a meeting scheduled at 11 and that he would be joining it. Patricia looked at him for a half second, then at me, then opened her legal pad. "Tell me about the business," she said. I opened my folder. For the next 45 minutes, I made the case I had spent 3 weeks preparing, the projections, the 6 months of actual revenue, the plan for the next 12, the specific amount I needed, and the specific purpose it would serve. Patricia asked good questions. James Calloway asked 2 that were better. At the end, Patricia reviewed the documents for a moment. Then she looked at James. Something passed between them that I was not entirely part of, a professional shorthand, the communication of 2 people who have worked together long enough to have a shared language. He nodded once. She turned to me. "We can approve a preliminary commitment today," she said, "pending the standard documentation, which we can start now if you have time." I had time. I was in that building for 2 hours and 40 minutes. When I walked out through the lobby, past the teller stations, past the counter, past the space where I had been standing against the wall with my folder and the sound of whispering, I walked out with a preliminary loan commitment letter and a new business banking package, and a meeting scheduled for the following week to review the final documentation. The teller station was occupied by someone else. I learned later, from a brief note that Patricia Okafor sent me the following week as part of the welcome packet for the new account, that Callaway Community Bank had a formal dignity and respect standard for customer interactions, and that all staff were reminded of it on a regular basis. The note did not mention specific incidents or specific people. It didn't need to. James Callaway sent me a handwritten note 2 weeks after that morning. It said, "Good luck with the store. I hope it becomes what you've planned for it to be. Community banks exist to help community businesses. I'm glad we were able to do that." It was signed with his first name only. I framed it and put it in the back office of the boutique, where I see it every morning when I come in. The word the teller used was embarrassing. She looked at a number on a screen and decided it told her something definitive about the person on the other side of the counter. She decided that a balance represented a conclusion rather than a moment, that where someone was on a particular Tuesday morning was where they were going to be, and that where they were was something to perform about in front of a line of people. She did not know about the 36 months of saving. She did not know about the lease or the stock or the Saturday in April with 12 people inside. She did not know about the 6 months of paying every vendor before paying myself, or the projections in the folder, or the 11 o'clock meeting. She saw a number and decided that was enough. James Callaway saw a person being told to step aside and decided that was enough for him. Enough to change direction across a lobby and sit down in a waiting chair and ask what I had come in for. The same information produced 2 entirely different responses. One of those responses built a bank. The other nearly cost a customer. I think about that often, about how much depends on who is paying attention and what they do with what they see. Someone was paying attention that morning. I am glad it was him.